free agent targets, like honestly, I haven't even looked. I haven't considered that. I honestly don't really start harping on free agents until literally right when March hits. But in terms of like, I know, but in terms of like who's gonna come back, I can harp on that with you is who should come back, who can fit. They don't really have like a lot of like really like must have re-signed players. Last year kind of felt more that way.
I know, right? I agree with that. Like they have, I guess they could. I think they have a lot of guys, in my opinion, that if they were to take cheaper deals, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you can keep them. But I don't see a lot of guys that it's like you have to keep them. Minus like a Brandon Ayuk who isn't necessarily on the trading block, even though he's acting like he is a free agent.
I think the only one who's clear cut to me is Juwan Jennings. He's a restricted free agent, which means like, by default, you should
will
get
you
him
say
back.
what that means? Because wasn't last year it was like other people had to offer a higher pick than the 49ers
we're about restricted free agents, and there's exclusive free agents, which means you're definitely keeping them back, and restricted free agents. Restricted free agent basically means like I think that typically falls under like late round players who have exceeded expectations to a certain level or met something, and you can put like a third round tender, a second round tender. But the thing is, when you put those tenders on there, if you're gonna keep him, you're gonna have to pay him like I think the going rate for that type of pick or something like that. So that means like the higher you go, the more money you're shelling, guaranteed money you're shelling out. And if someone wants to sign him, then it's like, okay, you're going to sign him and the Niners have the right to match or something like that, but you also got to forfeit a pick. So pretty much he should be coming back. It just really depends on what the 49ers are going to place on him, really. Because it's like, whatever you place on him, you have to be committed to like paying that type of money. And it's like, do you really want to pay that type of money to your third slot receiver? And you got to pay another receiver. I saw my boy Newman on Twitter talk about like, if you can get Kendrick Bourne cheaper and let him go, like do it. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of like that because he is probably like the same caliber receiver. It's not bad.
Style. They're the same. I feel like they're also aren't they kind of similar personality wise in your opinion?
They are exactly. Maybe Jennings might be the better blocker. No, I think he's definitely the better blocker. But I think in terms of like wide receiver, like Bourne's a little more cleaner. But I think ultimately, again, I don't think like it's not a stark difference where if it's like, oh, we're Jennings worth the extra $2 million over like if you could save a couple mil, like dude, take Kendrick Bourne. That would be bad. That wouldn't be bad. But yeah, like he wouldn't be bad. In terms of I know Cleveland Farrell might be a player you might want back like a year, $3 million because it's clear that he kind of was a miss in terms of being a solidification for he was a good middling player for run defense and pass rushing. Maybe bring back Kinlaw a year, $3 million, $4 million instead of base. He was pretty good last year. That you would consider Feliciano.
I think if you had to choose between keeping like Cleveland Farrell and Javon Kinlaw and because I think Kinlaw's gonna just because of where he was drafted, he's gonna get like $1 to $2 more million than a guy who is
at this point. Just because you're drafted, no one gives a shit. It's pretty much about like, look, we've seen you're not healthy. This is barely your first year, and you were solid. So here's $3 million incentive based on health, and let's see if you keep it going, and then we'll talk. So right now he's going to be another prove year. He's like he had a nice prove year, like okay, it's promised, but we're still not there yet. Just because he had that one good year doesn't necessarily like negate all the previous years. Maybe it was a fluke, right? Who knows? Yeah. So now it's like okay, I'm giving you this year,
prove it again.
Year $3.5 million, which is decent, and with incentives based, based on games played number one, and a little bit on improvement. So I think that's something to look at.
Do you not think that? Because I think that a different team might take a chance on him just because of draft position and like seeing that he was healthier. And I don't think the 49ers are going to want to get in any sort of
no one's going to look at draft position. I promise you that. No one's looking at draft position. Everyone's going to look like, what did you do last year? And is it worth from the year before? So he's for sure not getting any more than a year deal, which means like, okay, we're going to consider a little bit year before and this year. Can you be a filler player? Like
if he's going to get only a year deal from like multiple teams, I think he would choose to stay with the 49ers because he has a really strong relationship with Eric Armstead. I think he'll want to stay.
Like it's like I think he wants to stay. Like I think he'll want to come back for sure. It's probably his best bet too, to be honest. He finally has some momentum. Now let's see what he can be. What about Chase Young? I don't think Chase Young's coming back. I don't think you can sign him back. He's definitely going to get a year deal. No one's going to give him more than a year, $4.5, $5 million.
What's so fucked up is he like finally played his best game like in the Super Bowl. But I mean, all year round. If you think that the firing of Steve Wilkes was justified, because Steve Wilkes did decent in the Super Bowl, right? But like kind of all year, you were like, he's struggling. I feel like Chase Young is like an even more extreme example of that, where maybe his like first game I think everyone was like, oh, look, he like freed up Nick Bosa. He got a sack. This is great.
Yeah. His first
And
2 to
then
3 games, he was solid. And then after that, it was just
nothing. Like embarrassing effort in the NFC Championship game. And then for the Super Bowl, it looked like Wilkes maybe like went up to him and was like, dude, I'm going to get fired if you don't like pretend to freaking run, dude. And then he looked good in the beginning of the Super Bowl. And then he kind of, in my opinion, I mean, I wasn't staring at him the whole time,
he just became a
but
guy.
trailed away. Yeah.
But he had early impact.
Definitely a guy who's also like not going to get close to his
Yeah, don't
draft.
bring him back.
Like freaking Brandon Ayuk was drafted after him. Justin Herbert was drafted after him. How crazy is that?
His injuries
Like,
have really
was
messed
supposed
him
to
up
be
too,
like
though.
Nick Bosa.
You gotta remember his injuries have really messed him up, and like how long it took him to come back. And it's just that's definitely played a factor in his lack of ability or like in failure to progress. And he already wasn't a guy that wasn't like with great movement. So he's really like, yeah, he's really just like a guy that you don't want as your second best pass rusher. He's got to probably be your third.
Now, okay, I want to talk to you more about Aziz, because I think bringing Aziz back, a guy who knows the system, who's comfortable, like we were just talking about, like with Steve Wilkes, it seemed like the uncomfortable and the inability to like actually fit everything together seemed to be such like a detriment throughout the year. Like they could just never get in a flow. I mean, what was the game? Was it the NFC Championship game that Aziz came and he was like in the huddle with everyone before? Yeah. So like he totally still has a bond with all these guys. My only problem is like, because I'm kind of assuming that Greenlaw will be out most of next year, but I've gotten comments and stuff, and other people who say that I'm like way over exaggerating, and he might be, like ready to go and playing, by the first couple games of the season.
That's
so
crazy.
If it's like that, then they're not going to want to pay Aziz. They're not going to want to. It kind of depends like how long Greenlaw's going to be out, if they're going to be willing to pay for a guy like Aziz versus trying to just have one of their guys that they've drafted.
That's where this evaluation period right now for the last week and the next week or two is really going to be like, do we like D winners? Do we like Jalen Graham? Right? Is that his name, Jalen Graham? And do we like these players to actually step up? Are they coming along? Can we turn them into capable starters to hold us down for most of the season? Or should we cough up some of this dollars for Aziz, and will that be worth it instead? Because the Niners are good at finding like young, capable linebackers. Might be one of those guys are like able to take that step. So that would be interesting. That would be huge for them, actually.
Chasing Bay says bring Kawan back. My only thing is he's, in my opinion, older now. I don't
slow
and injured.
Slow.
Slow, injured.
He's an okay player, but he's just gonna get picked on in your defense. I'd rather go with young guys.
I like this too. Chase Young had a motor between his cheeks during the Super Bowl. I was like, where was his effort coming from? I agree. I felt like, but it's like, I mean, if you had 1 year, because people are kind of saying like, oh, like now he's going to get it together. That's kind of what people were saying when the 49ers first got him from Washington, right? Like if you didn't have motivation to go 100% this year, then I don't know how a team is going to bet that, you're just going to have all this motivation in the next couple of years.
There's a lot of question marks around him. That's like, it's going to be hesitant. People will give him more than like $5 million.
Oh, Kinlaw, no. Okay, this is interesting. We need an alpha male type players on this team, like Travis Kelce, which is a funny way to say his name or spell his name. When Kittle, Bosa, Ayuk, CMC, Warner speak, they're like kids. I don't agree with that. We need more fight in this team. I just disagree with this comment.
I don't think alpha male type players is actually the right look at, because they're pretty much all these elite leader players are pretty much like that to a degree, or if not totality. So that's definitely not a worry. What they need is.
I would definitely think of like Warner, Christian McCaffrey, Ayuk as like strong, out whatever you mean by alpha.
None of that is real. That's not any problem on the team.
I can see like if you're saying like Kittle kind of likes to joke around, but he's done. I mean, he has a podcast with his dad and his family, and they talk a lot about meditation and bringing yourself into other characters. And Kittle has often talked about how his character on the field is a more lighthearted guy because he feels like he plays better when he's thinking of it more as a game. Where when Nick Bosa talks, like maybe his voice might be like calm and quiet, but I mean, you can tell he takes his craft extremely seriously.
Right.
You don't get to this, that attitude can ruin locker rooms. I think
it can, but they don't have that problem. I think we're grasping for straws here that aren't even there.
I agree. I think that maybe that feels like a little like, hey, I'm upset about the Super Bowl loss.